For today's painting, I am using a 12 by 16 inch Frederick's canvas board. The size or shape doesn't matter, use whatever you have. Now I did add a very thin, light coat of gesso to this board, and the reason for that is because when I use the cloud brushes and do the scrubbing like we're gonna do today, I find that I need that little bit of extra gesso because otherwise the paint starts to lift off of the canvas with repeated layers of scrubbing. So just a really thin coat of gesso, and I actually just wiped it on with a paper towel. Super quick, nothing fancy. Over here I have my wet palette, and as you can see here, these are my new cloud brushes. I've got my cloud brush and my 1-inch flat. The brushes, these are actually the exact same as the cloud and flat brushes that you guys have been requesting that I bring back for a while now. Now my wet palette, I just barely reset my wet palette, so I don't have any paint in here yet, but I will be using the exact same color palette as always, and I'll just be putting them out as I need them. But as you can see in this image here, the colors circled are the colors that I will end up using in this painting. And you can find all of this information again in the video description below. To start out, I've put out a little bit of my PR 101, and I'm gonna put out some matte medium because I need to do just a light underpainting. When you're scrubbing with a cloud brush like we're going to be doing, it's important that you have an underpainting because otherwise sometimes the little speckles of the canvas texture show through. So just give it a quick underpainting, and I'm going to use my 1-inch flat brush. So I'm going to load up with medium first. I find that loading with the medium first helps me maintain transparency. If you get your paint first and then your medium, chances are you're going to pick up too much paint, not enough medium, you're going to have really opaque paint. So I just pulled a little bit of that color in, just mixing it with the medium on my brush. We don't want this to be overly, strong, because then we're going to have to fight with it a little bit more as the painting goes on. So just really transparent. Gessoing the canvas does make it makes it harder to spread the paint. So if you gesso your canvas and you feel like you're having to work a little harder to get that paint to cover, it's the gesso, it's not you. Don't worry about making it beautiful. As always, you don't have to worry about brush marks or making sure your color's even. Just make sure it's not too thick, like that you don't have ridges in your paint. That's really all I'm concerned about. Making sure the white specks are covered, making sure the paint isn't too thick. If I didn't have gesso on here, probably could have covered this canvas in 1 or 2 brush loads. Gesso is just very, very dry. All right, now we want to make sure that this dries fully before we start painting. So get out your hairdryer if you like, or just use this as an opportunity to walk away from it and plan your next course of action or whatever, but let this dry. I can't stress that enough. Every time I tell you guys, let things dry, I still hear people who get impatient and start working before the paint dries. Please be patient. Let your paint dry when it needs to dry. We will be back in just a few minutes. All right, now to get started on our background, I've decided on the colors that I'm going to use. And I've decided on raw umber, maybe a little bit of ultramarine so that I can take it to a chromatic black, similar to Payne's Gray. And I've decided that I want to use the Titan Green instead of titanium white, but you could use titanium white if you don't have that color. It's not a big deal. I just like kind of that dusty, muted quality that this color gives. So that's why I'm using that one. Now I'm going to start with my flat brush again, and I need a little bit more medium. And I'm going to start at the bottom and work my way up. Now in the image, I'm going to be doing kind of a foggy background, but the foreground is not foggy. So that's why I'm not using the cloud brush in the foreground. So I'm going to start with a mix of raw umber and ultramarine. Just get a nice dark, dusty brown. I'm not taking it quite all the way to a chromatic black, just a really dusty brown, nice and dark. There's matte medium in here, so it'll be a little transparent, but that's what layers are for. So I'm going to start back here, just kind of doing those lazy X's. And the reason this is so transparent is because these are both very transparent colors. So it's not going to completely cover that background color, and that's okay. Because that's why I chose that color for the background, because I knew that it would bring that warmth to the painting. I think that without it, the colors that I'm choosing, this painting could end up feeling kind of cold. And I want it to be moody, but not cold. So that's why I chose this nice warm color for the underpainting. Just another bit of that mixture. Just taking care to cover any white spots. I still have a few white spots. Lazy X's back and forth. I'm not moving on from a section until that whole section is covered. So don't get into that like scattered this type of thing. That's not how we cover a canvas. Back and forth, and we slowly move away from an area as everything gets covered there. I'm just going to let it fade up into here. Just kind of dust that out. There we go. That will be a nice beginning. I took it up about a third of the way up, maybe a little bit more than a third of the way up, and then just started to really dust it out. All right, now I'm going to go to my cloud brush, and this is dry. When painting like this, you want to use this brush dry. And the reason for that is the water will make the paint look more smeary. You'll have a harder time getting a nice smooth foggy look. It'll look more smeary. So nice and dry, no medium, and I'm not going to pick up a ton of paint. I'm going to pick up just a little bit of this color, kind of chromatic black, maybe just ever so slightly on the brown side. But it's not a ton of paint. There's no glob of paint here. I'm going to come over into my Titan Green and mix that in. Let's grab just a little bit more of that. That's actually right about what I'm looking for, right there. See, the paint is just kind of smeared. No globs. Now, I have my tracing element here, and I'm just going to hold it up, decide kind of where I'm going to want those things placed. And I want the glow to primarily be behind my raven. So I'm going to see where about is that. Looks like it's right about in this area. So that's where I'm going to concentrate this lighter color. Now I'm going to use, I use 3 descriptions here when I'm using a cloud brush. I use full foot pressure, which is the brush being pressed completely flat on the canvas like that. It's like if you're standing flat on the ground, all parts of the bottom of your foot are touching. There's half foot, which is kind of if you're rocked up on your feet so that your heels are just off the ground. And then there's tippy toe pressure. So we're going to start with full foot pressure. And you can go up onto the tippy toe and kind of scrub in these little circles to get it down into the texture. All I'm really looking at doing here is making sure there's no hard lines. You want everything to blur out, and you want to make sure that you're covering as much of the little speckles as possible on there. Do not use your paint too thickly here. You want to kind of struggle to get it to cover. If you're using too much paint, you're going to be struggling to spread that paint out far enough, and it's not going to look foggy, it's just going to look blobby. So nice and thin. See how I get up onto the tippy toe and kind of twirl? That digs down into the texture. Full foot pressure to really fog things out. And the half foot pressure kind of breaks up lines. Let's mix up a little bit more of that, I think. It's okay if it leans a little bit more to the blue or a little bit more to the brown. It's okay if it's a little darker, a little lighter. All of those variations are okay. That's why I do it this way, so that I get those variations. All right, I'm going to start just outside of where I left off with that full foot pressure and just scrub right into it. Don't keep anything separate. If you're afraid to go into a section you just did, you're going to end up with like polka dots everywhere. I am actually going to lighten that just a little bit more. Maybe make it a little bit cooler. Now, if you don't have one of my cloud brushes and you can't get one for whatever reason, you can use any brush. That is probably one of the questions I get asked more than just about anything. What do I do if I don't have a cloud brush? You can either get one on my website, there's a link in the video description below, or you can use any brush that you are comfortable scrubbing with. Remember that scrubbing with a brush can potentially damage it, which is fine if it's a brush that you have designated as a scrubbing brush. If it's a brush that you want to keep as a precision tool, like this one, this is more of a precision tool, then you don't want to scrub with that. But if you have any kind of a brush that you're just like, I'm okay if this brush ends up getting ruined, then use that. The thing about when I say ruined, the more you scrub with a brush, the better it's going to be at its job. So don't be afraid to scrub with a brush. All right, here I've got a bit of a line, a tiptoe pressure nice and light, and just get rid of that line. This paint dries pretty quick when you apply it this way, so I'm not actually blending wet paint into wet paint here. I'm creating a visual blend by scrubbing thin layers of paint over top of thin layers of paint. So hopefully that takes a little bit of pressure off of you if you're worried about blending before your paint dries. Don't worry about blending before your paint dries. I'm going to keep going around that bright spot, and I am going to come back and brighten it up a little bit more. I will definitely be doing a couple of layers on here. If you can see your brush marks, like if you can see texture in your paint as you're applying it, then you're using way too much paint. So just wipe a little bit of it off your brush before you come to the canvas. And just kind of a light scrub there to blend. I like a bit of a vignette on moody images like this. So by Vignette, you know, I mean like the darker edges that kind of blur toward a brighter middle. So I'm gonna slowly make my paint a little bit darker as I work toward these outer edges. I think it's just a really nice way to depict some mood and atmosphere. It helps focus your viewer on your subject as well. This will take some time. Don't try to rush through this. If you have my new line of brushes, my filberts, I don't have my biggest one here, but if you have this set of brushes, you can use those brushes in place of a cloud brush. Don't worry about, you know, ruining those. The cloud brushes and those brushes, they were both made with scrubbing in mind. I'm kind of a scrubber. That's what I do. So I have to make my brushes with that in mind because I know that I'm going to scrub with them. So that's just who I am. So if you've got a filbert similar to the one I just showed you, maybe that's something that you could use if you don't have a cloud brush. Let's start to get lighter. I'm just going to grab more of my Titan green. Always start outside, especially when you're using two very different colors like that. Start outside and then move into it, because if you start right in that color, you're gonna obliterate it. You're gonna lose it. But if your dark is too much there, let's say that right here, if I felt like that was too dark, I could start right in it because that will help me lose that darkness. But if you don't want to lose it, start outside of it. And always remember that pressure is key. Hard pressure, if you're really grinding the brush into the canvas, that's gonna lay paint down, it's gonna help cover things. But if you're just really dusting like that, then you're just gonna blend and kind of fuzz things out. And always remember, friends, I know that as a person who sells paintbrushes, I should probably not say things like this. It's probably not what a good salesperson does, but it is not the brush that's magic. It's you. So you can do anything with any kind of brush. I made these ones specifically so that they would stand up to scrubbing and that they would make certain things a little bit easier or, you know, whatever, but it doesn't mean that it's the only brush that you can use. Okay, we are gonna let all of that paint that I just scrubbed dry. I'm just trying to cover. I can see some little white specks in the canvas there. You want to let this dry, because if I come and start scrubbing on top of it again, it will lift it off. Even though it's mostly dry to the touch, just let that dry completely. Now I know I said that you want to use this brush dry, not wet. So if you only have one, wring it out really good on your paper towel after you wash it. Set it somewhere where it can dry. And I do have another one here, so I like to keep two when I know I'm going to do some back and forth layers, so that I'm not trying to struggle with a wet brush. Let's work on the lower part here again. Let's get a little bit more of this blue-brown mixture. And there's a little bit of that Titan green in there, and that's okay, because I'm going to start working just a little bit more opaque. Just a tiny bit of medium, because I like the way it makes the paint flow. Tiny bit of Titan green to add some opacity. And we'll just start down here again. Just kind of short brush strokes, lazy X's. Remember that old video that I did about the smoky backgrounds 2 ways? I'm essentially doing everything that I showed you in that video here. Both of those examples that I showed in that video, I'm doing them on this canvas. Super light pressure, see I'm just on the tippy toe to blend there. These little brush marks, they're okay, because I'm not done. Heavy pressure to lay down paint. Up onto the tippy toe to blend. And again, this sky color is pretty much dry, so I'm just creating a visual blend. I'm not actually blending into wet paint. A lot of little speckles in that little area there. Okay. I'm going to let this dry again, maybe 20-30 minutes, and then I'll be back and we'll do another layer. All right, so far I'm actually pretty happy with the way that this is turning out. So I want to show you at a distance here how it looks, and then I'm going to zoom you in so that you can see what I see up close, because I know sometimes what you see right in front of your canvas is different than what you see in a video. So as you can see here up close, you can see a lot of speckles. You can see, you know, where the colors aren't perfectly blended in. You can see some of that orange underpainting through there, especially in places like this. But it's not a big deal. I don't want you to feel like you have to get rid of every single little bit of that underpainting. Putting the underpainting on there is not a challenge to make sure that you cover all of it. We put that color there for a reason. See that warm glow that's coming through that color? That's exactly what I wanted to see and why I chose the color that I did. Now I'm going to leave you zoomed in there a little bit, and I'm going back to my cloud brush. This is the same one I was using. It's had a bit of time to dry, so it's pretty dry. It's pretty dry. So we'll call that good. Let's get our Titan green. I'm going to work in this really light area, the area that I want to be the lightest. So I'm going to get a bit of that and I'm going to mix it in here. I don't want it to be pure Titan green, but I want it to be nice and light. Let's start with that and see how that is. So right here in this lightest area, it's that half, it's about full foot pressure. And see how I lighten my pressure here to get it to blend a little bit. And of course, this is all dry, so it's just a visual blend. Really, really light pressure. And right here, if I want to get rid of those little orange spots, just up onto the tippy toe, and let it dig down into the texture of the canvas. Just zooming out a little bit more so you can see how it's starting to look. One other thing that's really important when you're painting like this with these really thin, dry layers on top of really thin, dry layers, you want your color transitions to be very subtle. So if you have an area that's too dark, you don't want to just make some paint that's quite a bit lighter and take it over it, because you're going to have a hard time getting a blend. You can kind of see I've got a little bit of that happening right here, but I know I'm going to put more paint there in a few minutes, so I'm not worried about it too much. Just kind of dry brushing this color in some areas. Let's go ahead and darken that just a little bit. And see, that color is a little bit closer. It's kind of halfway between this and this. So I'm having an easy time blending it into both. Let's stick with that. I like that. About that value. I'm not so worried about the actual color, you know, whether it's the leans toward the blue or the brown. I'm more concerned with the value. And that was a little lighter than I actually wanted, but I'm just going to go with it for now, because otherwise I'll have a weird spot that's just lighter. This layer that I'm working on, this second layer, I don't need to take it over the entire canvas. It's really just making adjustments to that first layer until I have what I want to see. Just not covering all of those orange spots, just dulling a few of them. Some of them were really, really intense, and I just wanted to knock that back a little bit. This canvas has a lot of texture to it, and then with the gesso, that kind of amps up the texture a little bit more. Super light texture there. Or light pressure, sorry. It's about half foot pressure. And not digging into the canvas too hard. Darken these corners a little bit for that vignette feel like I was talking about earlier. See right here where I said it was a little too light? Not a big deal. I think I'm going to bring the dark up a little bit higher on this side here. A little bit bluer, because cool colors will help make something feel darker, even if it's not necessarily darker. I want it to feel a little darker on this side, I think, because our subject is going to be over on this side. I think I'm almost done with this background. I do want to kind of pop the highlight in this area a bit more, but other than that, I feel like we're pretty close to being done with this background. You can do as many layers as it takes. A lot of times when I paint like this, I do use more than 2 layers, but you know, if you feel like you accomplish it in 2 layers, then that's perfect. Bring this down a little bit more here. I'm not so worried about any texture from the brush marks because there's going to be stones and rocks and things there. Just go straight into the Titan green. I have very little paint on my brush, so this is mostly going to be that Titan green. Right here where I know my subject is going to be, where I want to create kind of my focal area. I'm using very light pressure, just dry brushing. You can glaze with your opaque color here. So if it's just not feeling foggy or misty or moody enough for you, you can get a bunch of matte medium. I would use a brush like this instead, but you can get a bunch of matte medium and really make this Titan green super transparent, and then just brush it gently and thinly over the entire canvas. That will help you get a bit of a foggier effect too. I may or may not do that. I'm kind of feeling like I'm not going to do that, but we'll see. In my tonalism school on my website, we've been talking about glazing with both opaque and transparent colors a lot. So I've been kind of thinking about opaque glazes a lot more than usual lately because I've been talking about it. So let's go ahead and call this about good for now. Work on the ground a bit as soon as I get the bulk of this paint off of the brush. Just kind of dry brushing, just a hint of that light color over this, because that'll help give that effect that the ground is fading into the distance and fogginess, but without really having to work for it so much. I do feel like I'm going to bring kind of this fogginess down just a little bit more, just a bit more. Then we can work on the ground. One more little bit with the Titan green. Okay. Let's see how that does. Okay, back to my 1 inch, flat, and I'm gonna get some medium. Some of my brown, some of my blue, nice and dark, but also a bit on the transparent side. And again, just filling in some of this. I'm using these short brush strokes for a reason. If you see, we're starting to build a little bit of texture here. We don't want this to be perfectly smooth and solid because that's not what the ground looks like. We want some texture. We want it to feel like there's some overgrown grasses and rocks and things like that. And very lightly up over the top of our foggy blendy area. I may take a bit of this in the corners too. Let's see. Okay, I think that that is good. Now we want to let this dry because next I'm going to transfer the tracing element onto here. And if your paint is wet, when you do the tracing, you'll either lift paint off with the paper or you'll just deposit way too much of your chalk or whatever it is that you're using on your tracing paper. So let's let this dry until it's completely dry to the touch, and then we will get our image on there. Okay, as you can see here, I've got my image traced onto my canvas. And if you're not familiar with the tracing process, basically I just took a piece of colored chalk, whatever color you feel like will show up on your canvas, but not affect your paint too much. So I chose this light tan color because I felt like that was going to be a pretty easy color to blend in if it showed at all. And I just scribbled it on the back of my tracing element, taped it to the canvas, and then drew over the lines with a pen. That's it. And there's two for this painting because this one wouldn't fit on this to just print out on a single sheet. So I just ripped the edge so that I could see exactly how I was placing it on my canvas. Now we're going to start by filling in some of our shapes. Now for this part, to fill in the raven, I'm going to use my number 5 round brush. I've wet this in the jar a little bit, and I'm going to mix my chromatic black. Now, if you really want to, you can absolutely use something like Payne's Gray for this. You don't have to mix your chromatic black for this part. I am going to because I just like to have that control over the mixture, but whatever you want to do is perfectly fine. This isn't about me dictating what you do. It's just about telling you how I do things so you can get an idea for how you might want to do things. So I'm going to mix my chromatic black with a bit of my raw umber and ultramarine, but I am going to put a bit of the Titan green in there because I don't want it to be transparent. And I don't want it to be perfectly black right now because that's going to be hard to come back from. I just want kind of a mid-tone gray to start with. That will give me the opportunity to shift my values lighter and darker on the raven as we go. So I just have this mid-tone gray. I did outline my raven in a little bit of black watercolor pencil, as you can see there, just because that tan was hard to pick up on the camera up in this lighter area. So I'm just going to start very delicately filling in my shape. I'm going to take my time. There might be some breath holding in some of these small, delicate areas. But this is a good opportunity for mindfulness. You know, just absolutely take your time filling in your raven here. Because the more care you take in this first layer to get your shapes just right, the easier things are going to be for you as we go along. I don't want to lose my wing, so I'll probably just alter the mixture a little bit so that I can still see where my wing is. Letting my brush wobble a little as I describe these lines, the outer line, because he's an old, wizened raven who's kind of puffed up, so his outer edges wouldn't be all smooth and soft. They would be a little bit jagged, a little bit wobbly. No need for anything close to perfection. Sometimes in some of these little bits, you have to get just a tiny bit of water. Just helps you get into those tight spaces a little bit easier. I don't usually pick up extra water on my brush, but for work like that, sometimes you have to. I think I'm just going to warm this color up a little bit more. Still want it to be my chromatic black, but I'm just going to push it a little more to the side of the brown. Again, I'm just looking for a color that's slightly different, just so I can keep track of my wing. Let's put just a little drop of water in there so the paint flows nicely. Yeah, there we go. It did leave just a bit of a halo around that edge too. As we go and we start doing the detail work in the crow or the raven, it's okay if we lose that line. But if I lose it right now, then I'm afraid that my wing is going to get weird as I do my detail work. So for now, it's okay if it stands out. As we do the detail work, it will fill in and start to look like it's part of the bird. Just keeping my brushwork, though, fairly in the same direction that the feathers would be moving. this right here is one important reason why I choose not to use a color like Payne's Gray. Why I choose to make my own chromatic black. With Payne's Gray, you don't have the option of, you know, adjusting your temperature to do things like that. You've really got one color, or else you have to bring in another color anyway to adjust it. So I just think it's easier to make my own. And there's a million ways you can make a chromatic black. It doesn't have to be these same two colors that I'm using. All right, I'm going to darken it just a little because his legs don't need a lot of definition. A little drop of water because it's pretty delicate in there. And I'm going to fill in the legs just loosely. I may lose the legs and the toes as we fill in the rock. So that's one of the reasons I'm not putting a lot of energy into them, because I'm probably going to have to redo them anyway. So these are just kind of placeholders. I think that's good. It's good for now. I'm going to put out a tiny bit of Cad Red Medium and a tiny bit of Cad Yellow Light. I don't need a lot of these colors in this painting, but I will use them a bit. And I'm going to stick with my number 5. I'm going to fill in his eye. Just get a bit of my Cad Red, a little bit more of my Cad Yellow. And I don't want him to have like flaming red eyes. I'm not looking for him to be, you know, all evil looking or anything. Throw a little bit of that green in there, the Titan green. And I think I'm going to throw just a speck of ultramarine in there because it's just going to dampen down those colors so that they're not, you know, flaming red. I think that's good to start. Let's see how that looks. It's very peachy. Let's brighten it up just a little bit more. If it's too intense, we can knock it back later. We'll just start with that. That's okay to start. All right, let's fill in our rock. For the rock, I think I'm actually going to use my number 4 Bright. This is in my new line. They look like natural hog hair bristles, but they are synthetic, which I think is nice. So I'm just going to wet it, wipe it on the paper towel. I don't want a lot of water. These brushes hold a lot of water. And I'm going to mix up kind of a stony color. And one of the ways we're going to keep this rock from blending into the background is by changing the temperature. So for the background, we used these two colors plus the Titan green. So I am going to start with a base of that. It's a good kind of stony color. But then I'm going to throw a little bit of my PR 101 in there. It's going to warm it up a little bit. And some of my Titan green. I'm really just testing the color right now. That's why I'm mixing such a small pile of it. All right. So I'm basically looking at my reference image and I'm just kind of creating a map with this color here. I'm not looking to make any kind of details or anything like that in the rock. I'm just saying, okay, this is about a mid color. So I see that mid color roughly here on the rock. Kind of over here, not trying to get rock textures or shapes or describe cracks or any of that stuff just yet. Get rid of that chalk line. This is the exact same color as here, but notice how much lighter it looks here because it's on that darker color. Just an illustration of how, you know, it's all relative. When you look at a reference image, sometimes you have to be careful what you may look at and say, oh, that's white. If you were to mix up the actual color, it might be a mid-tone gray, or vice versa. You look at something and you think, wow, that's a really dark gray. But when you mix it up properly, you realize, oh, it's actually really, really light, or maybe it's even pink or blue. So just really get used to considering the surroundings. What's around the color? That's going to help you decide what the color actually is. So I lighten this a bit. I might need to lighten it a bit more actually, because this is going to be the lightest color of my rock and it's on the lightest color of my background. So again, it's going to have to be a little bit lighter to show up. I like that that black watercolor pencil is pulling into this a little bit because it is helping me get that kind of stony look. Just barely get in there in between the toes. Because the background color is so close to the rock color, if I don't get every little speck between the raven's toes, it's not a big deal. It's not going to show. Just short brush strokes. Don't worry about filling in all of the little holes to cover the background. Let's make that a little bit darker. We'll just grab some more of this. And I'm going to warm it up. There we go. And our rock starts to get a little darker this way. I may need to darken that a bit more, but let's just stick with that for a second. Down at the base of the rock where it meets the ground, just let that blur out. That's going to be the easiest way to hide that, to hide the base of the rock once we start doing the ground. So just don't leave the bottom of the rock like that. That's going to be really hard to cover up later. Yeah, let's darken that a bit more. I'm going to add a bit more of the blue. Remember that we talked about this in the tonalism school on my website recently, that a lot of times you don't necessarily need to go darker to describe a shadow. Sometimes what you need to do is just change the temperature. A warm color is going to a lot of times appear lighter than a cooler color. Nice and dark in here. Soft lines. Just make this rock what you need it to be. Sometimes I find personally when I'm looking at an image of something that's very kind of abstract looking, like a rock face, there's not a lot of very specific form, you know, it's a lot of lines and shadows and highlights and things like that. Sometimes I find that it can be challenging to follow it exactly, to describe what it is that you're seeing. And if I follow too closely where I see the lines and the shadows and everything, my rock can end up looking either really fuzzy or kind of cartoony and fake. So a lot of times I'll just kind of use the image as a starting point to say, oh, okay, this is how the lights and the shadows on this element react to each other, and kind of what area of the rock might have highlights on it or shadows. But ultimately, I kind of follow my own path here. I'm putting highlights and shadows where I feel like they make the most amount of sense. So don't get hung up trying to follow the image of this rock too closely, because you might struggle with that as well. And it's okay, especially right off the bat here, for this rock to be good enough. All we're doing is creating a map that we're going to follow later when we start detailing the rock. I'm not detailing it right now. And there's still a lot of that underpainting showing through in parts of this rock. All right. All right, same thing with the skulls, and I'm actually going to warm up the skulls even more than the rocks. The one rock. So I bring more of that PR 101 in and Titan green. Again, guys, please remember that if you don't have Titan green, you can just use white. More. Just looking for kind of the mid-tone color in here. A little bit of medium, maybe a little bit of water, just to help that paint flow a bit. Now there's a lot of values in our skulls here, and we can very easily lose everything here if we paint this all in one color. So I'm going to take this mid-tone color, and I'm just going to paint the parts that I see that are the lightest. I know not everybody likes skulls, so if you don't like the skulls, you can leave them off, or you can turn them into rocks, or you can do whatever you want to do. People ask me a lot, can I leave this off? Can I do this? Can I do this? This is your painting. You do whatever you need to do. I'm not the boss of you. I'm just showing you how I did it. Taking really careful care, just like I did with my raven, just to make sure that my shapes are at least pretty good to start with. Because if my shapes are off, then I might struggle later. A bit of a highlight in here, on the nose. No hard lines. I had a hard line there. I don't want that hard line there. I think that's really all I need to do on here right now. I'm not going to go in and paint in anything darker because that ground color is pretty good. Just pop some of that lightness a bit. And then we'll move on. And same thing with this one over here. Just the highlight a bit. I decided to do this painting because my husband and I have a new project that we're working on, and this kind of falls in line with it. I can't say what it is just yet, but very soon, I will tell you what it is. I think some of you are going to be really excited about it. You'll really like it. Some of you won't care, and that's cool too, because we all have different things in our lives that we enjoy. But this definitely makes me think about our new project, and I'm just really excited about it. Which is why I'm being vague and telling you that there's something there, but not telling you what it is. All right. I think that is a good start for that one. Oh, we have a weird thing going on there. There we go. That's better. One more little dollop of brightness right up here. All right, let's do our little lantern here. So I'm going to start with just kind of roughly the same color I used on the raven. I'm going to keep it pretty dark. Tiny dollop of water. And let's just loosely fill in the top here. We might lose some of this detail. That's all right if we do. If you still have a little bit of your chalk lines showing, once you're done, just wait until your painting is completely dry. I mean, like it's been dry for a day or more. Fully dry. And then just take a damp, very slightly damp brush and just loosely brush over the whole thing, and that will remove any chalk lines. But if you do it too soon, if you do it, you know, just when your paint has become dry to the touch, you will remove paint. Even if you touch it and you're like, oh yeah, that's dry. I guarantee a damp brush is going to remove that paint. So just let it dry for a full day. I'm just going around the edges here I know that this is supposed to be light inside, but if you look at it closely in the reference image, there is a dark bit around the edge of it. We don't want to make it just a big, bright yellow rectangle. All right, cleaned off that brush. I'm going to go into the same color I used for the eye, but I'm going to make it a little bit more yellow. I think I'm going to dirty it with a little bit of PR 101. That's good. And some Titan green. Let's see how that looks. Keep your outer edges nice and soft. Doesn't go all the way to the edge of the lantern. That's what's going to help it feel like it's glowing. I think that's a good start. I don't think we need to do much more than that to start with. Maybe I'll just pull it out on this side a little bit farther. All right, so there we are so far, and so far I'm really quite pleased with it, and I hope that at this point you are pleased with how yours is coming out too. I think here I want to start working on the ground because these elements, they're all looking great, but they're kind of floating. We've just got this underpainting here. So let's get some texture and a little bit of value to kind of help anchor these to the ground. Okay, so on the ground here, I think I'm going to stick with my number 4 bright. Let's use that and just see, because we have a lot of rocks and stuff, things with some potentially angular shapes to it. So we'll stick with this for now. And I'm going to look for something just kind of neutrally. I like what's happening here, but it's a little warm, so maybe I'll just pull a bit more ultramarine in there. And some more of my Titan green. Just a nice pale color and some medium. I want this to be a little on the transparent side. Now in here, I'm going to be very loose. I'm just going to let the shapes and textures kind of evolve. So I'm using the side of my brush. See that? Just the side. Just looking at my reference image to see where do I see textures and lighter colors and kind of what direction do I feel like they're moving in. I feel like over here we've got things kind of moving in that direction. Here it's a little bit more scattered. Looks like there's even some flowers or something going on in there. Maybe it's dried leaves, or there's definitely some ivy. There's all kinds of things going on in here. Now, don't be shy in here because we're going to come back with a couple of layers. You potentially are going to lose a lot of the colors and shapes and textures that you put in here. So I would actually suggest that you put in a little more than what you think you actually want, because you're going to lose a lot of this light color as we move on to the next layer. And then when we start that dark layer, I suggest you put in a little bit more than you actually want, because you will lose some of it in the following layers. So don't be shy in here. No need to be afraid. Just get in there. And since our rocks and our skulls aren't done, if you need to overlap it a little bit to get in there, that's okay. Do what you need to do. Because the rocks and skulls, like I said, they're not done. We're going to add more. That's pretty good. I'm actually going to lighten this a little bit. And just get a little bit more deliberate in a few areas. I like the suggestion that there's some brighter points and some rocks or something here. Kind of helps draw attention to the ground where the skulls are. Careful that you don't get too shapy. Don't have, I kind of have it going on right now, but I'm not worried because I've just started. I kind of have this shape and this shape. Don't have these like stringy blobs. I know, like I said, I've got some stringy blobs here right now, but they're not going to stay that way. But sometimes I see where, you know, as I'm going, I start with stringy blobs like this. And then when I see the paintings that some people have done and they say, well, I don't like the way the ground looks. They don't like the way the ground looks because they ended up with shapy, kind of stringy blobs. So just really watch for that. Make sure that you're not doing that. Right now, you're going to do that because that's just how it is when we're building our layers. Let's get some dark in here now. And I'm going to go into my chromatic black heavy on the side of the blue. So it's just a little bluer than it is brown. And I think I'm actually going to grab a hint of my cad yellow because there is some greenery on the ground. This is a very gray, muddy green. You do not want a bright, vivid, pure green. It's going to seem fake. Nothing in this painting is, you know, actively growing and alive. So just a suggestion of green, and look at how green that reads on this warm gray background. Maybe we'll pull a little bit of this up the side of the rock. See how I kind of break up that shape? Now I don't have that stringy blob there anymore. Same thing here. Let's get rid of that. I still will have that rock that I want there, but I don't have to deal with that stringy blob shape anymore. Just pull that up the rock a little bit. Suggest some leaves or something. Just using the corner to kind of indicate. I'm not trying to draw a leaf specifically. I'm not really doing anything specifically outside of our shapes that we traced on. Other than that, everything is very general. I'm really gonna define around the edge of this skull because that's gonna make him stand out more. Kind of cover the bottom edge there. Let's pull a little more yellow in, but that's mostly just to lighten the color. I'm going to throw a bit of PR101 in there because that's going to dampen the green again. Keep it from being too intensely green. Over here where we've got this light, it might be reflecting on some of that green and just kind of popping the vivid nature of it a bit more. But since this is fall, we absolutely need some warmer colors on the ground because we're going to have some fall leaves. You might have some green, you know, like grasses or whatever, but we might also have some fall leaves. So a little PR101 with some yellow. My brush is still dirty, still has that green on it, which is going to help keep this color from being too bright and, you know, happy orange. Let's see how that looks. Yeah, that's a good color. Too much paint on my brush though. And yes, this color might be too much. Everything's just kind of getting melded together and it doesn't look real good right now. I know that. And if yours is looking like this and you're thinking, God, this just looks awful, I promise, hang with me, go with it. Don't try to correct anything right now. Painting a lot of times is about learning how to think a few steps ahead. And this is another thing that I just talked about in my tonalism school on my website. By thinking ahead, you can plan what it is that you're about to do. So, like I said, I'm looking at this and I'm like, God, that looks terrible. But if I try and correct it now, I'm going to struggle with it more. But I know that I'm going to come back in a minute and I'm going to glaze quite a bit of this with a very dark color. And a lot of that's going to be pushed down and deepened. I'm going to lose some detail. I'm going to be able to knock back anything that I didn't like. So I don't need to worry about it right now. All I'm doing is getting some of these colors and shapes in there, getting myself some options, creating some texture. That's it. I'm not worried about how any of this looks. I'm fully aware that it looks kind of garbage. But, you know, if your painting looked great right out of the gate, well, then there'd be no reason to continue on with that painting. You know, it's not going to look great until you're done. It's not going to look great until you've put in the work. This is part of putting in the work. So if you already know this part's going to look like garbage, then just enjoy making the garbage. I'm going to keep my number 4 bright. And I'm going to mix up some fresh chromatic black. There's a lot of the green over here, and I don't want any of that. I want this transparent. So, some brown in my ultramarine. I'm going to keep it a little on the ultramarine side because, again, cooler colors read as darker colors. Let's get some medium in there. Mix that in so it's nice and transparent. Roll off some of that extra paint. And I'm going to start at the base of my rock because I know I want it nice and dark here. Kind of cut around our skull here. If it's nice and dark on the outside of the skull, it's going to help it stand out. And here is where I'm glazing some of this dark color. When ultramarine is wet, it reads very, very blue. So this might look super blue to you right now, but don't worry about it because when it dries, the blue relaxes a little bit. See, glaze it right over those orange bits that were too much. You can still see them suggested in there, but they're not screaming in your face anymore. Let's glaze down around the base of the skull to say that the skull is casting a bit of a shadow on the ground underneath it. Same over here, nice and dark. Where are we dark? It's pretty dark right in here. And I don't want the ground to be too light as it approaches the edge of the canvas, because those are going to create drop-off points. So I'm kind of trying to trap the viewer inside of the painting, which I know sounds creepy, but you want to give their eye as few exit points as possible. Bright areas are going to be exit points. And especially in a painting that's a little dark and moody, maybe even creepy, if you keep them pinned into the painting so that there's very few exit points, it kind of amps up that feeling of, you know, spookiness. Just a little bit of scrubbing, applying the paint thickly in some areas, and scrubbing it out thinner in others. Now over here we've got a little bit more light on the ground because that's where our light is. A little bit of a cast shadow in here. But nice and soft. You can even scumble a bit of this up into the rock. I'm going to need a brush. I'm going to need a second brush for what I'm about to do. So I just picked any brush. It doesn't matter what kind. And I wet it in my jar and dried it off on my paper towel so it's damp, but it's not wet. So I'm going to set that aside for a minute. Now I'm going to let's get a little bit of red. Let's get a little bit of yellow. Just an orangey color. Let's throw a little bit of PR 101 in there. I'm just looking for kind of an orangey color that's just a little bit dirty. Throw a little bit of that in there just to dirty it. I think that's good. Okay, now I'm going to dip into my water, and I brought a good amount of water over on my brush. You can see it doesn't quite flow, but it looks like it wants to. Let's see if I push it. No, not quite, but it's about the consistency of ink. That's what I'm looking for here. So scoop up a good bit of that. Keep this brush handy. I'm going to put it in my tray there. Now, I'm going to point the corner to my canvas. I'm about 1 inch away, and I'm just going to flick quickly. Now this brush is here so that I can wipe it away when it gets on top of something that I don't want it on. Don't be afraid to wipe it with your finger a little. Just getting a bit of some leaves and just building the texture. If you rely on one method to build your texture, all of your textures are going to be the same. But here, I'm getting a couple of different methods in there to build my texture. And so I'm getting different textures. That's looking much better. I'm liking that. Yeah, I'm actually going to go into some of that green too, that dusty, dirty green. So we'll get some of this Throw it here, a little yellow. There we go. A little bit of extra water until that paint is about the consistency of ink. Scoop up a bit. It's very controlled. Don't go nutso when you're flicking. That's how you get things super out of control. Know what you're doing. Know why you're doing it. And if you have to practice on a piece of, junk paper, scratch paper, to figure out your method for this, figure out your technique, how you're going to get your sprays to look exactly like you want, please do that. I know that a lot of people struggle with doing this, with flicking, and it's, everybody connects with techniques in a different way. Some people automatically just understand how to do a technique, and some people struggle with them, and it's okay. It's okay if you struggle with it, but the way we stop struggling with something is by practicing it. So practice it. Just get a color and a piece of paper and just splatter until you've got it figured out. Okay, I think it is getting there. So far, I am super pleased with where this painting's going. Let's work on our raven a little bit more. All right, so on our raven here, I want you to remember a couple of things. Now, when we pull up our reference image, it can be really intimidating because we're like, how are we going to, describe all of these little itty bitty bits of texture and color in here? And I mean, if you really want to make yourself crazy getting in there and drawing every little rib and every little break in the feathers, go for it. You will make yourself crazy. Your raven will look stiff. You will be unhappy with him. You may be unhappy with him. I guess I can't say you will be, but you will make yourself crazy. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to look at him as an overall. What values do we see? What direction do those values move? That's how we're going to approach this. So I'm not going to zoom into my raven super close so I can see every little thing. I'm going to leave my image zoomed out just so I can see general values, general colors. So let's go ahead and start working on this forward wing because it has the lightest value on it. And really, if you look at it, it is pretty warm too. I did warm it up here, but in the reference image, it does appear to be a little bit warmer too. So I'm going to lean my chromatic black on the side of brown. I'm not going to make it brown. It's still going to be chromatic black. It's just going to shift toward the brown. So nice dark mixture, about as dark as I can get it. Nice and warm. And we're going to throw a little bit of Titan green or pure white in there. Let's see, how different is that to, oh, it's actually darker than that. There's that relativity I was talking about again. A little more, and actually that's pretty cool. Let's bring some more brown in. Let's start a little bit lighter than we think it actually is, because we can glaze it to make it darker if it ends up lighter than we want it. A little bit of medium, just because I like the way it changes the texture, not for any other reason. Just kind of pressing my brush flat. It's a round brush. Let's see how I've kind of got it chiseled because I smeared it flat. All right, so as I look at my reference image sitting on my table over there, this is still pretty dark, isn't it? Let's just go ahead and get the outer edge here done. We'll just start with that, and everything generally moves in a downward way there. Where else do I see this color? I actually see this color quite a bit here. Let's lighten it a bit more. And just get some of that in there, just like on the ground. This is exactly like when I was adding the different colors to the ground, the little scrubby bits of the different colors, and I said, it looks really bad right now, and that's okay. This is the exact same thing. We're doing this the same way. The only difference is we're using different colors, and our brushwork is moving in different directions. But otherwise, this is the same thing. So now you know the answer. When somebody says, how do you paint feathers? Well, you paint them the exact same way as you paint a rocky ground. It's the same way. How do you paint clouds? Well, you paint it the same way as you paint feathers, which is the same way as you paint a rocky ground. It's just shapes, colors, values, and edges. Remember that. We talked about that in the still life painting we did with the cloth, the fabric on the table. We just have a little bit of a highlight on the top of the bird's head here. Yeah, so we talked about that a little bit there, about how, actually a lot of it, about how everything you paint, it's just the shape of something, the color, how dark or light it is, and the edges. So how do I paint a beak here? Well, it's two sharp edges that end in a soft edge. So it's a triangle with two sharp sides and a soft side over here. Same with this one. This one's just a curved triangle. Just building some texture in the wings. Maybe a little bit of texture here. Some of this slightly lighter color. There's gonna be just a hint of this lighter color down the leg here. Okay, I washed off my brush, and I'm gonna go back into my pure chromatic color with no white in it. So some brown, some blue. I might even shift it closer to the blue again because it's gonna make the color seem darker. Just a little bit of medium to help maintain a bit of transparency. Now, where's our bird the darkest? When I look at my image at a distance, I feel like he's the darkest right here. Right along the front of his body, in front of that wing, kind of moving up into his head. I know I put some light here, but when I glaze this dark color over it, I won't lose all of that light. See, now when we start getting the dark in there, he comes to life. If we're afraid to go too dark, our things don't wake up. They don't become lively. Nice and dark in there on his tongue. It's a bit darker here. Just kind of glazing this color. It's very transparent. Nice and dark around his eye. For those of you in my tonalism course or my tonalism school on my website, all of the techniques that we've talked about in painting those landscapes, we're really doing very, very similar work here. kind of dry brushing, not applying real thick, heavy paint. So maybe right there where I want it nice and dark, almost black. Now I can start filling in that halo. Remember I left that little halo where my sketch line was? Make sure that you fill it in at some point. And this dark color is helping to fill that in, but also set this front wing apart from everything else. Doesn't mean there's no dark in here. Soften up that line there. Just give him a little bit of a fluffier neck. Nice and dark in here. So my tonalism school, we focus mostly on landscapes, but really we're learning kind of advanced painting techniques. So if you are interested in learning some advanced painting techniques, I hope you will join me over there. You can just go to my website, paintingwithjane.com, and then click Academy up at the top in the menu, and you'll see all of the courses that I have to offer in my academy, and one of them is the Tonalism School. We do 2 paintings per month, plus a Q&A critique session where you can get a little bit more info on any of the concepts that we learned that you might have questions about. You can get a critique on your painting if you want. I don't require anybody to participate in that. I know some people aren't ready to have their work critiqued, and I understand that, so it's not required. This is really a bit more of an advanced painting than some of the ones that we do as well, just because I'm focusing on some of those techniques, the heavy layering and glazing and things like that. So we're going to get some of this dark color in here, generally following the shapes that I've created with those brush strokes. Lightly glaze some of this over bits. Not looking too bad. This wing is a little bit separate-y. We blend a little bit more than that. I'm going to pull that over top. Let's darken the legs, just kind of recommit to them. Our rock is not done, so don't worry about the rock. And we will come back to that eye in just a second. I know he looks kind of scary. There, I think we've broken that line on the wing pretty good. Okay. Let's go back into our light color. I didn't wash off my brush. Pull a little more brown into there. And more of my Titan green. Let's mix that here. Let's just see how that compares to what we've got. Yeah, that's good. Very short brush marks. The very light touch, that's going to help kind of keep some of that feathery look to it. Now we've got our lines that kind of move this way. But they move down as well, so it's like the feather comes this way, but the little feathery bits kind of hang down. Just suggesting kind of that rib on a feather there. And just like on the ground, some of that's going to look kind of garbagey, but we're going to fix it up in a little bit. I think that's a bit light right there. Just gonna break that up. I'll put some dark over it in just a minute. Let's work on his eye for a moment. I cleaned off my brush. And just some of this orangey yellow. Keep a little bit of that dirty bit to it so it's not neon red. But I will take just a bit of this brighter color. Just give right where we kind of want to look on him, just a bit of a brightness. Oh, that got away from me. Okay, I think the beak is, or the eye is good for now. Let's just work on the raven a little bit more and then we'll move on. So my number 5, and I'm gonna get some of my dark color. I'm gonna mix up a little bit more, and I'm not gonna put any medium in it. I want it to be pretty opaque. And I'm just wanting to find a little bit more definition in some of these feathers. So keep your lines soft. You know, you can come up into some of these, but it's a nice thick but break up that line a little, especially at the bottom. And if your texture got to be too much, if you had too much of, one color or the next, this is a good opportunity to get rid of it. To kind of kick something back if it's a little too bright. For example, I said that right here was too bright. So I'm just lightly dusting some of this color over it. Even though I didn't put any medium in it, it's transparent, these two colors. So I can kind of glaze a bit without having to work too hard for it. I'm really pleased with the way this raven is looking so far. We're not done, but we're getting there. Some little dark bits hiding up in here. Lost my little rib. Just running a dark color right under it because that helps pop that brightness without having to get too nutso with it and make it too bright. Kind of like that here. Just a little bit of a shadow. Not bad. I still need to do the highlights. So our raven is not done. So we need to put the brightest highlights on there, but we're getting pretty close. Let's just punch the shadows on the head and face just a little bit more, especially right here, kind of coming down the face. Fix that little bit where the color got away from me. All right, I think that's a good place to stop for now. Let's start working on our rock a bit for a few minutes. Okay, I am gonna stick with my round 5 and my dark chromatic black that doesn't have any of my white in it, but we are gonna make it more transparent. So I'm gonna get some medium, kind of mix it off to the side here. See how transparent that is? Very, very transparent. Just kind of roll my brush to get extra paint off of there. Now I'm going to try and make some cracks. You don't need to be too worried about the cracks. They don't have to be perfect and beautiful. Again, this is the same way we painted the ground. We're just going to do some stuff and it's probably going to look kind of garbage. It's not going to look good. See how transparent that is? We're giving ourselves options. We're building some texture on the rock. If your paint is too opaque at this point, you're going to have a much harder time getting rid of these marks later, or masking them, or assimilating them in, whatever it is that you end up needing to do. So very faint, just sketchy lines. I'm looking at my reference image, but I'm not really trying to mimic everything I'm seeing. I'm just kind of taking a cue. How do these cracks move? How do they help indicate the different faces of the rock? That's all I'm looking for. We've already got this one taken care of. That might be good for now. Just a little texture. Gonna go back to my number 4 bright, and let's get some of our warm color here. So we've got this gray. We're gonna warm it up with a little bit of PR 101. And some of the Titan green or white, whatever you're using. Nice light color. I'm not looking for the lightest color on the rocks just yet. Just kind of a light color. Let's see where this color fits, and that's just where we'll start. I didn't put any medium in this. I don't think. If you saw me put medium in it, I just did it for texture. I didn't do it for transparency. So I am kind of going over some of these cracks, but I'm not obscuring them all the way. Again, just kind of looking and seeing, where do I see a lighter color here? Definitely lighter here. That's about the same. Let's go lighter, actually. I'm going to mix it off to the side here so it's noticeably lighter. Yeah, good. See, very short brush strokes. Don't get in here and try and cover everything. We build the layers for a reason. If you come back and you cover everything in your next layer, then there was no reason to do all of that work with the layers in the first place. Where else do we need some highlight? Maybe right up here. Very angular brush strokes. That helps say, you know, what part of the rock is facing up, what part of the rock is facing you or facing the side. It's all about the angle of your brushwork and the color that you're using. The brighter colors are obviously going to be on the top and facing any light sources, but this color is not quite right for our light source. So that's why I'm not putting any of it really over here where the lantern is. That's not bad. Let's darken it. That's not dark. Well, let's see. I don't want this area to be too light or too dark. So we'll kind of mid-tone that. Get rid of some of those extra crack lines that I put in there. Just get a bit of this going on in here. Kind of wipe down a little blob, and then with the very tip of the brush, so you're just smearing it and pushing that paint. I'm going to lighten it here just a hint, because that's going to help make that under part just feel darker. This might be too light for this area, but it's fine. I'm not worried about that right now. Just a little bit of a piece that's kind of poking out. And we don't want this to feel like a weird, just black hole. So we are going to keep some highlight suggestions. This is exactly what I was talking about with thinking a step ahead. I know that I don't want this color in here. I don't want this light, but I also don't want it to just be a dead black hole, which it's kind of turning into. And the only way I can have both, not have it this light and not have it be a weird black hole, is by putting a bit of this color in here, and then I'm going to glaze it, just like we did on the Raven, how I added a lot of highlights and then took some of them back, but you could still see where they were, even though I made them darker. So that's what we're doing here. Maybe we'll pull a little bit of something out here. Don't be afraid to get too light in an area that you know you want dark. It's harder to make something light enough once you've made it dark. So yeah, don't sweat making it too light. Good, let's go even darker. I don't think I'm going to get any more of the green. I'm just going to use what's on my brush. By green, obviously, I mean the Titan green. Maybe a little bit of medium. See if we can make it just ever so slightly more transparent. And let's work on darker bits. There we go, yeah. It's got to be a lot darker in here because this bird is casting some shadow on top of our rock. A little round spot there. Just make sure to angle that off. Your rocks, a boulder like this is not necessarily going to have any rounded fractures. So right here, I've got some kind of rounded bits. I want to get rid of that because these fractures would be much more angular. This color is much bluer, which again just helps it feel darker. Yeah, let's keep some of that in those crack areas. I'm just using the tip of the brush. Kind of did that motion by mistake. And that can work as some cracks. warm it up and lighten it. Just going back and forth with some of these rock colors. Just do what you feel like you need to do to get your rock looking the way you need it to look. But the best advice I have for you here is be patient. Do not, don't get impatient if your rock is taking some layers and, try and do it too fast or lay down too much paint or the wrong color of paint or any of that. Be patient. Let it build on its own. Very often, I think that we don't have faith in our abilities. I know that that's something that I struggle with sometimes, Sometimes I have a hard time painting because I don't have faith that I can do something that I need to do. Or, I wonder, well, what if it sucks? Or what if I can't do it? Or any of those things. I'm no different than you guys in that regard, I have the same kind of fears and I let them stop me sometimes. But I'm working on trying to keep some faith in myself, Clearly, I've been painting for as long as I have, and nobody has fired me yet. Nobody's taken away my paintbrushes or said, yeah, we don't think that you get to do that anymore. You're not very good at it. And that doesn't mean that I'm always good at it. Sometimes I really do just straight up suck. But not always. And, it's just about having faith in yourself. Not everything you do is going to be great, but not everything you do is going to be garbage. Give yourself a break and have faith in yourself. All right, I'm going to leave this for a few minutes, at least just the highlights. I'm going to move on from the highlights for a minute, in just a minute, obviously. Clean off my brush. I'm going to stick with it. Let's get our dark color. I'm going to go as chromatic black as possible. I'm not going to let it shift too much blue or brown. Just the darkest, most neutral balance between the two that I can possibly get. Okay, no medium. Nice and opaque. Let's darken this shadow area. But then as it comes down here where I put that lighter color, we're going to glaze that so I don't lose all of them. This little area over here is kind of getting away from me, I feel like. And I think it's just because I haven't put any real attention into it because the light is going to change things. So maybe we should work on that for a minute because since it doesn't agree with anything, it's kind of weirding me out. But before we do, let's just keep this super dark color and just amp up a couple of our cracks. All right, let's work on that lantern. Sticking with my number 5 round. I haven't used this brush much at all over the last few years, and today it's getting a workout. So I'm just going into my red-orange or my red-yellow mixture, a little bit of PR 101, and let's go pretty light. Mix that off to the side here. Keep a little extra yellow in it than that. Tiny bit of medium. Yeah, that looks good. Just kind of dash marking in there. You don't want to lose all of that first color we put in there. It's going to progressively get lighter, and that's what's going to make it glow. Maybe we can take a hint of this color and just start suggesting it on our rocks. That's good. Just kind of dry brushing. Let's go lighter. I think I am going to end up bringing a new color in to finish up the highlight in this lantern. But let's take it as far as we can before I do that. So I just added more yellow and more of the Titan green. Whoa, that was real aggressive there, wasn't it? My slightly damp brush will help get rid of some of that. Medium, let's mix it in there, get that color nice and transparent. This is gonna look really awful for a minute, you guys, and you're gonna wonder what I'm up to, but I promise you, do the same thing. So I thin down that color. It's very, very transparent, but it's still lighter, and it's still adding some of that color to this rock here. Just that texture, get some texture in there with a bit of that color. Okay, I think, well, let's pull it out a little bit more. Change the shape of the rock there a bit. Get rid of that. I like that better. All right, we want this to dry before we can really move on with that. So let's work on our skulls for a minute. Let's keep this color. We're going to warm it up a little bit more. And we're going to lighten it. Nice and light. Roll a bit of that off. Let's even go a little bit lighter. Start where you want the lightest highlight on your skull. And I'm just using the tip of the brush. I'm just going to kind of scumble a little bit. Still have my chalk lines, but they're about gone. Not too worried. There's all this chalk in there too. Pretty happy with that color of chalk that I chose to use, though. I haven't had any issues with it. If you did my skull and butterfly painting a few years ago, that's pretty much what we're doing here, just on a much smaller scale. Much, much smaller scale. And again, don't worry about getting anything too light, because it's the easiest thing to come back from is too light. But it's real hard to come back from too dark or not light enough. Okay, I think this color is good. Just make sure all of our little high points are covered. Let's darken it a little bit. Just go up into this batch of paint. That's not much lighter. Let's go ahead and darken it. It's a little bit better. If you decide not to do the skulls, because I know that every time I do a skull painting, lots of people want to do it, but they don't always want to do skulls, so they do other things instead, or just leave them out altogether. But if you do this and you don't want to do the skulls, I'm interested to hear, what is it that you want to replace it with? What are you going to paint instead of a skull? Are you going to turn them into rocks, or just leave them out altogether? What do you think you're going to do there? Let's go back into our light color and we'll do the same thing on our other skull. And then we'll come back with our lightest color, or I'm sorry, our darkest color. We still need to do our brightest highlights. These do not have their brightest highlights on them just yet. Just kidding, that one apparently does. Don't leave that brow ridge too dark right in here. I know mine is super dark right now, but I'm going to come back with another color. Otherwise, he's going to look like a serious caveman skull or something. All right. Let's actually get that light color that I accidentally plopped onto that one. We'll put it some over here while we're at it, while we've got it. Now let's get our dark color, and this dark color is actually really warm. If you really zoom in on those skulls, those shadows are very, very warm. So let's just see what happens when I do a mixture of ultramarine and PR 101. If I can get it dark enough and warm enough, so no raw umber this time, just these two. There we go. This is actually my go-to chromatic black in my tonalism school. So of course I knew that it would go dark enough. I just wanted to build suspense for you, I guess. All right. Let's get real dark in here. And if anything that was light got away from us, was too much, or, you know, got wobbly, we can absolutely get rid of it. Just focus on the darkest bits. The parts you look at in the painting and think, okay, that looks almost black. Same thing on this one. We might have to go bluer because that warm color isn't really reading dark enough. So I just pulled a little extra blue in there. There we go. Much better. Now we can thin this color down a bit and use it to glaze out kind of the in-between bits. So there we go. And anything that was too bright, this is where I said don't worry about it being too bright. See, because you can very easily glaze it down darken it a little bit. This guy needs some help. There we go. Oh, much better. There's still something weird. Oh, I didn't do my mid-tone. That's why. This guy didn't get mid-tone. It's a little light still. There we go. Much better. That guy looks angry. Let's fix that. I don't want him to look angry. There we go. A little angle in the eyebrow is really all it takes to make him look angry. Last thing, I'm gonna clean this off. Actually, I'm just gonna wipe it on a paper towel. Just wipe off that extra paint. Little medium. And I'm gonna go right into my green. So there's still a little bit of the other colors on my brush, but it's mostly just the Titan green. I'm just gonna kind of punch the highlights very selectively. Just really on the bits that I really want to stand out. All right, we're looking pretty good. I just wanted to take a step back and kind of see how everything is coming together. And I feel like we are getting there. This poor lantern needs some serious help. So let's see if we can help it. And you know what? If we decide that the lantern doesn't work, we can paint it out. So we'll just keep going with it for now until we decide that we can't go anymore. Okay, so let's start by fixing up the top shape of this ridiculous looking thing. It's kind of got an odd perspective. I just like to think that it's sitting at a weird angle. Who knows what's really happening here? We'll call it like that. That's good enough. Now what I want to do around the outside edge where I glazed with this yellow color that's really weird looking is I'm going to go back to my number 4 bright. Let's get some of this. A little extra PR 101. A little medium, nice and transparent. Let's actually dirty it just a bit. And we're going to glaze it here. That's going to help it feel like light glowing on the rock, reflecting on the rock. Let's get some more of this dark mixture. Just keep some texture in here. You don't want this to just be a big weird glow. I do want to bring that bit back. So you can take things away and bring them back at a moment's notice. Don't feel like every brush stroke is, you know, the brush stroke that is going to stay and describe everything. You can make changes. That's looking better. Still looks real rough, but it's getting there. Okay, that's a little bit better. I am going to bring in that other color. It's another color that's in my standard palette. It's this Titan Violet. I really, really love this color to help make yellow pop, make yellow glow. I know that seems kind of counterintuitive to use purple to make yellow shine, but I think it works really, really well. So I'm just going to grab a bit of this yellow. Maybe let's just dirty it a bit with whatever's going on in here. And I'm going to lighten it with the Titan Violet rather than the Titan Green. The Titan Green makes yellow really dull, but man, that Titan Violet just makes it glowy. I think the shape of my lantern is really funky, but you know what? It's a rough old thing. We're just going to say that it's okay. It's been dropped a few times. It's been hanging out in this creepy place for a while. It's got some character. That's what's happening. Yeah, we're gonna round that off, I think. Let's do that. Okay, let's... Little PR 101, little medium. We kind of lost the glow around the edge. Now this lantern might be escaping from me. But it's okay. Yeah, we're gonna let that dry for a few minutes because I wanna work on the background again. I know you're probably like, we just finished the background, but we didn't really finish it. We just kind of stopped. So I'm gonna go to, let's see, I think I'm gonna do my number 6 filbert. If you have my number 6 cloud brush, which I have not remade, only the large number 12, you could use the number 6 cloud brush, the smaller one. Okay, so I'm just gonna dirty my brush with a little bit of this. I'm not picking up a lot of paint, see that? It's just very little. And I'm gonna get some Titan Green, just a bit. Be a little bit more than that. And a bit of medium, nice and transparent. I have very little paint on my brush, and what I do have is very transparent. Starting up here where you're not really gonna see it too much, we can cut in around the edge of the rock if we need to, but I'm going to reshape this lantern there. There we go. We'll make it a round lantern. I think that works better. But what I'm going to do here, my purpose in this, is to reshape things, yes, but we need to bring that foggy feel down onto the ground a little bit. So I'm gently scumbling that over the edge of the grasses and stuff here. And then stop. It's not a lot, but I feel like without that, the ground may look a little bit separate, like there's not fog going on behind it. That's better. And I think I'm going to lighten it more. Tiny bit of medium. I just want to intensify the foggy glow around our raven. Oh, here's Mr. Moon. I don't know if you can hear him, but he's got something to say today. Don't give your raven like this big, solid halo. You want everything scrubbed out. Scrub it out, nice and thin. If you can't get in those little areas, that's fine. Come back with a different brush in a minute. Always remember to pay attention to how much paint you're using. Don't want a ton of paint here. Ooh, that's a bit bright. I don't want it quite that bright there. Actually pull some of this up. Let's work on the highlights on our raven just a little bit more. A little bit of the green. We'll just grab a dash of that. No medium. We're going to be real selective where this color goes. Very short, very directional brush strokes. The feathers do get a little longer as we move down the wing, so the brush strokes can get a little bit longer, but we don't want to go crazy and do way too many, so be really conservative with it. Oh, we made him look startled. Well, I did. I won't blame you guys for that. Be careful where you put these highlights there. It's really just kind of got a little bit of one across the top. I know that angry red eye is really out there, but not done with his eyes. one brighter, I'm actually going to just dip into this violet, the Titan Violet. Again, just continue to use titanium white if that's what you're using. It's just such a good pop color. It's ever so slightly violet. It's not, I would not call it purple at all. It's barely even violet. Just a very pale pinkish color. And I feel like this is about all our raven needs. Whoa. Maybe just a little poke on the legs here. All right, let's finish up the eye. Make him not look quite so insane. Let's just get this dirty color, a little bit of our green. There we go. Just take a little bit of that out. And then in the middle, we can get a bit of this. That's better. It's just not this bright orange dot. Wipe that off. Let's just get a tiny poke of this dark, dark color. Just soften the shape a little bit. I'm not going to put like a pupil, but we can take the tiniest point of whichever white you think, and I'm just going to put just a tiny reflection. I think that's better. Back into our yellow and violet. Just a nice bright color here. I'm not going to have it like kind of be bursting out the way it is in the image. I think that that's really phony looking, but just kind of dashing that through there. We'll make it look like a rounded, kind of a rounded lantern. I'm gonna do one thing. I know you guys are probably so tired of watching me mess with this stupid lantern. Should have gone with a candle. So I'm gonna mix up a gray color that's very similar to the background. There we go. Just change the shape of that dumb thing. Let's get a bit of that bright color on the brush, but see, it's very little, almost none, almost none. I'm going to dry brush just a little bit around it with barely any color. Might even be too little. Just create some kind of glowing air around this cursed lantern. Should have done a candle. A candle would have been much easier. But you know, if we don't do things that challenge us from time to time, we don't grow. That's not too bad, and it helps kind of make the air seem a little foggy. So that's okay. Hides the stupid shape. I'm really in love with the lantern, if you can't tell. A little yellow, a little medium, maybe a little pure 101. Just a nice warm color. Just a bit of a glaze around there. There. I think that that is pretty good, actually. It's not the best lantern I've ever painted, but it'll do. I think the last thing I want to do is just punch some highlights on the rocks, and then we're done. So just some of my Titan green, maybe a little bit of the Titan violet. You know, that looks really bright, but it will soften as it dries. It won't be quite so vibrant. Be brave, and tiny hint there and here. Almost, almost, almost. We are going to be done in just a second. Back to my chromatic black. I'm just going to make sure there's a good shadow underneath the lantern. Maybe up here on the top of it. And I'm going to call this one done.